Once upon a time, in a land where the trees grew tall enough to scratch the belly of the sky, and where the rivers sang lullabies to the stones they rolled over, and where the wind carried the smell of rain even on the driest and most golden of afternoons, there lived a spider. Not just any spider, mind you, not the small and forgettable kind that builds its web in the corner of a ceiling and spends its days catching flies no one will ever notice or mourn. No. This was a spider of an entirely different order. This was a spider whose name was spoken with a particular kind of tone, the kind that sits somewhere between admiration and wariness, the kind you use when talking about someone who has done something extraordinary, and also, perhaps, slightly dangerous. His name was Anansi. And before you close your eyes tonight, before you let the soft, dark arms of sleep carry you away to wherever it is that dreams live when they are waiting for you, you need to hear what he did. You need to hear it, because what he did changed everything. Not just for the people in his village, not just for the creatures of his forest, not just for the land where the rivers sang and the trees touched the sky, but for every living soul in every corner of the world, stretching all the way to where you are right now, lying here in the comfortable warmth of your blanket, breathing slowly, listening. So pull that blanket just a little tighter. Settle into the soft weight of your pillow. Breathe in once, slowly, and then out again. And listen, because this story belongs to you now, and it always has. And it was waiting for you to be ready to receive it. Anansi lived in a village that sat nestled in the curve between two great hills, like a child curled between the knees of a sleeping grandmother. The morning mist rolled down from those hills every single day, without fail, slow and white and dreaming, wrapping itself around the ankles of the trees and softening the edges of everything until the whole village looked like something remembered rather than something real. The village was full of people who laughed loudly and often, who cooked extraordinary things over open fires and let the smell of it drift out into the surrounding forest as a kind of general invitation to anyone who happened to be passing. They told stories around those fires, stories that crackled and spat like the flames themselves, stories that sent sparks of meaning into the dark and made people sit closer together on their low wooden stools and lean forward with their chins resting on their hands. It was a good place to live. It was a warm place to be. The kind of place where somebody always knew the name of the plant that would make your stomach feel better. And somebody else always knew the exact right song for a funeral. And somebody else still could look at the sky in the morning and tell you with reasonable confidence whether the afternoon would bring thunder. Knowledge lived in that village the way warmth lives in a fire, distributed, shared, passed from hand to hand, and mouth to ear, and eye to memory, belonging to everyone and to no one in particular. But Anansi, being Anansi, always wanted more. He did not want more yams, though the yams in that village were exceptional. He did not want more palm wine, though the palm wine was perfectly fermented and very much enjoyed by everyone who tasted it. He did not even want more silk for his webs, though his webs were already the finest and most geometrically perfect structures in the entire forest, admired even by the most competitive of the other spiders who would never in 1,000 years have admitted it out loud. No, what Anansi wanted was something far greater, far heavier, far more precious than any of those things. What Anansi wanted was wisdom, all of it, every single drop, every grain and particle and thread and whisper and fragment. He wanted it gathered together in one place, and that place, naturally, would be with him. You see, wisdom in those days was not something that lived inside any one person or creature. It floated around in the world like seeds released from a pod on a windy day, traveling on currents of air that carried them to wherever they needed to land. Some of it settled into the mind of an old grandmother who had watched 3 generations of her family move through the particular difficulties of being alive, and had learned from every single one of them without ever quite meaning to. Some of it drifted into the heart of a farmer who had planted in the wrong season once, lost everything, wept quietly for a night, and then understood something about the relationship between water and soil and patience that he could not have understood any other way. Some of it slipped into the dreams of a child who would one day, years from now, become a great leader, and who was storing things up without knowing it, the way a tree stores water in its roots during the rainy season, so that it has something to draw on when the dry season comes. Wisdom was everywhere. It lived in the calluses on a fisherman's hands, in the particular angle at which a midwife held her head when she was listening to a mother in labor, in the way an old woman could tell by the quality of a silence whether it was a comfortable silence or a dangerous one. It belonged to everyone in small portions, scattered and generous, the way sunlight belongs to everyone by falling on whatever it falls on, without discrimination or preference. But Anansi had a different idea about how things should be. He sat on his web one very early morning, 8 legs crossed, in a posture of careful thought several of his many eyes watching the sunrise paint the horizon in colors that had no names in any language yet. Orange, bleeding into pink, bleeding into a gold so pale it was almost white. And he thought to himself in that particular way he had of thinking, which was like watching someone fold a very complicated piece of cloth, layer upon layer, each fold creating a new crease, each crease suggesting a new possibility. He thought, what if I could gather all the wisdom in the world and keep it for myself? What if every answer to every question, every solution to every problem, every understanding of every mystery that had ever puzzled any creature anywhere, what if all of it lived in one place, and that place was me? The thought made something hum in the center of him. It made his silk threads vibrate with a fine, excited trembling. It made him rub his front two legs together in a slow, deliberate motion that was his version of a smile, the private smile, the one that meant the plan was already forming. So Anansi began. He spun himself down from his web on a single thread of silk. This thread deserves a moment of description because it was remarkable even by the standards of Anansi's silk, which were already very high. It was thin as a whisper and strong as a promise, and it caught the early light in such a way that it seemed to be made of something between air and water, something that existed in the space between the visible and the invisible. He descended on this thread with the unhurried grace of someone who knows that the world will wait for them because the world does not have a choice. And when his 8 feet touched the ground, he began to walk. He walked through the morning market first, because the morning market was where the village came most fully and noisily alive, where every piece of practical knowledge the community possessed was on display, pressed between the vendor and the customer, exchanged along with the yams and the dried fish and the bolts of cloth and the clay pots stacked in careful pyramids. He moved through the crowd invisibly, which was one of his great advantages as a spider, because the crowd was busy with itself and did not look down. And Anansi was very good at occupying the small spaces between things. He stopped beside old Kofi, who sat on his low wooden stool with his net spread across his knees, his brown fingers moving through the meshes with a knowledge so deep it had long since stopped requiring thought, finding the tears and the weak spots by touch alone, mending them with the easy confidence of someone who had done the same thing so many times that the action had become part of his body rather than a decision made by his mind. Anansi sat very still beside the old man's foot and listened as Kofi talked to his neighbor about the river, about how the fish moved differently in the weeks before the rains came, how they gathered near the surface and became careless, easier to catch, but also less flavorful, and how the smart fisherman adjusted his technique accordingly, rather than simply being grateful for the easier catch. He listened to the description of a particular deep pool, 3 bends upstream from the village, where the largest fish went during the hottest part of the dry season, seeking the cold water that came up from somewhere underground. He listened to the talk of currents and of the way different kinds of bait worked at different depths and in different temperatures. He gathered all of it, carefully, the way you gather rain in a bucket, tilting to catch every drop, wasting nothing. Then he moved on. He crept beneath the low door of the medicine woman's hut, which was the smallest and most densely packed structure in the village, every surface covered with bundles of drying herbs and stoppered clay bottles and strips of bark hung on pegs and small pouches of powder and seeds arranged on shelves with a precision that looked chaotic, but was in fact a highly sophisticated organizational system that only the medicine woman herself fully understood. She was teaching her daughter that morning, the 2 of them sitting cross-legged on the earthen floor with a collection of plants spread between them, and the daughter was young and serious and wrote nothing down because writing things down was not how this knowledge was passed along. It was passed along by speaking and listening and repeating and practicing and making mistakes and being gently corrected, the same way it had been passed along for longer than anyone could accurately remember. Anansi sat in the shadow beneath the shelf and listened to every word. He listened to the description of witch leaves, when crushed together with a small amount of water and applied to the forehead and the wrists, could bring down a fever that had been burning for 3 days without breaking. He listened to the instructions for preparing the root that eased the particular kind of stomach pain that came from grief, as opposed to the kind that came from eating something that disagreed with you, because these were different pains and required different treatments, and knowing the difference mattered enormously. He listened to the warnings, which were the most important part, the things that must not be combined, the plants that were medicine in small amounts and poison in large ones, the preparations that required the patient to be awake, and the ones that required sleep, the situations in which treatment should wait, and the ones in which waiting was itself the most dangerous thing you could do. He gathered every word and tucked it away in the deep architecture of his memory, which was vast and well organized in the way that only a truly intelligent mind can be, like a library that has been built over many years by someone who loves books and understands that the value of any individual book is multiplied by how easily you can find it again when you need it. And then he moved on. He climbed the great fig tree at the edge of the village, the one whose roots had long since made peace with the large, flat stone they had grown around and through and under. And he sat in the crook of a high branch where he could see and hear without being seen or heard. Below him, in the shade of the tree's enormous crown, the elder men of the village had gathered to discuss a matter that had been troubling the community for several weeks. Two brothers, the sons of a man who had died the previous dry season, were disputing the inheritance of a piece of land. Each believed it was rightfully his. Each had reasons. Each had witnesses. Each was, by the judgment of most of the village, at least partially right, which was precisely what made the matter so difficult to resolve, and why it had come to the elders rather than being settled between the brothers themselves. Anansi watched and listened as the elders worked. He watched how they did not simply hear the two sides and then announce a verdict, the way a judge in a story might. Instead, they asked questions, careful questions, questions designed not to catch anyone out, but to open the matter further, to reveal the shape of it from angles that had not yet been examined. They asked about the father, about what he had said to each of his sons in the years before his death, about what the land itself had historically been used for, about the relationship between the brothers before the dispute, and what a resolution in either direction would do to that relationship, about whether there were other members of the family whose needs had not yet been mentioned, but whose interests were relevant. He watched how the wisdom in that circle was not located in any single elder, but moved between them. One man speaking, another adding, a third gently questioning, a fourth sitting in silence until exactly the right moment, and then saying the one thing that shifted the entire conversation onto slightly different ground. He watched how they handled disagreement, not suppressing it, but using it, the way a fire uses the wood it is given, as fuel rather than obstacle. He watched how they arrived, eventually, at something that was not quite a solution, but was more than a compromise, a path forward that acknowledged the complexity of the situation and gave both brothers something while demanding something from both of them as well. A resolution that required the ongoing participation of the community to maintain, because it was built not on a winner and a loser, but on the continued willingness of everyone involved to honor it. He gathered all of this too: the method, the patience, the particular quality of attention, the way they held the whole picture in mind while examining any individual part of it. And then he moved on. For many days he walked and listened and gathered. He left his village behind and traveled to the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that, crossing rivers by walking along the underside of the surface, which is something spiders can do that most other creatures cannot, and climbing hills by finding the paths that the goats used, because goats understand hills in a way that is worth paying attention to. He traveled through forests where the light came down in long, slanted columns through the canopy, and the ground was soft and dark and smelled of things that were in the process of becoming other things. He traveled across stretches of open land where the grass was tall and gold and moved in the wind with a sound like very quiet breathing. He went everywhere, and he listened to everyone. He sat with old men who had survived things that should have killed them, floods and famines, and the kinds of conflicts that tear communities apart and scatter the pieces, and who had come through the other side of those experiences, carrying hard, dense, compact knowledge of the kind that can only be won by going through something rather than around it. These men spoke slowly and without dramatics, because the things they had learned did not require decoration. They simply described what had happened and what they had understood from it, and their words landed with a particular weight, the weight of things that are true. He sat with young women who worked at their looms with a focus so complete that they seemed to have left the physical world behind entirely and gone somewhere inside the pattern they were creating. He watched their hands move and listened as they talked to each other about the language of the cloth, because cloth in those days and in those places was not merely decoration. It was communication. The patterns carried meaning, histories, relationships, statuses, prayers, warnings, celebrations. A woman who could read cloth could read the social world of her community in a way that was invisible to those who had not been taught. And Anansi absorbed this language, the vocabulary and the grammar of it, the way specific combinations of color and shape and sequence created specific meanings, and how those meanings shifted depending on context. He spent 3 days with a blacksmith who worked in a small forge at the edge of a village, a man who had inherited the craft from his father and his father's father. Before that, a lineage of understanding about metal and fire that stretched back to times before memory. The blacksmith was not a talker. He communicated primarily through demonstration, through the movements of his hands and the quality of his attention, through the sounds he drew from hot metal with his hammer, through the way he read the color of heated iron, from black through red, through orange, through the particular shade of yellow that told him the metal was ready for shaping. Anansi watched every movement and stored away not just the information, but the texture of the knowledge, the way it lived in the body as much as the mind, the way decades of practice had made the craft partly instinctual. A conversation between the blacksmith and the material that happened below the level of conscious thought. He visited star readers who could map the sky the way others map the earth, who could tell you not just where you were in space, but where you were in time by looking at which stars were visible and at what angle and in what relationship to each other. He visited farmers who understood soil in all its variations, who could pick up a handful of earth and tell you what it lacked and what it had in abundance and what it would or would not grow, and could tell you this not through any process of formal analysis, but through a knowledge built from a lifetime of watching and tending and making mistakes and adjusting. He visited the women who predicted rain by watching the way ants carried their eggs when they moved them from one location to another, a behavior that changed subtly in the hours and days before a storm, in ways that the ants themselves did not consciously understand, but that the observing eye, trained over years, could read as reliably as a written forecast. He visited the children who moved through the forest with a freedom and confidence that their elders had long since lost, who knew which mushrooms were safe by a combination of shape and smell and color and location, who knew where the streams were and where they went, who knew which paths through the undergrowth led somewhere useful, and which ones looped back on themselves and deposited you where you had started, confused and scratched by thorns. And from everyone, he took something, not by force. He did not announce himself or make demands. He simply listened, quietly and completely, from whatever small, unseen position he could find, absorbing what was said and what was demonstrated, gathering it all into the increasingly dense and organized spaces of his memory. The more he gathered, the more certain he became that this was the right project. The more he accumulated, the more the idea of having all of it, of being the single repository of everything the world knew, seemed not just desirable, but necessary, even urgent. Who knew how much was being lost every day? Old people died and took their knowledge with them. Whole ways of knowing things were being eroded by the simple passage of time. Someone needed to be the keeper. Someone needed to ensure that nothing was wasted, that every piece of hard-won understanding was preserved and held safe. Why not him? He was, after all, the cleverest creature in the world. Who better? He thought about this as he walked home through the forest, his mind humming with everything it contained. And the more he thought about it, the more righteous and even generous his plan seemed to him. He was not doing this for himself, he almost believed. He was doing it for the world. But here is the thing about gathering wisdom. The more you collect, the heavier it becomes. Not in the way that physical objects become heavy, but in a different way. A way that is harder to describe, but easier to feel. It becomes heavy the way responsibility becomes heavy, the way a secret becomes heavy, the way the continuous effort of holding on to something important becomes heavy when you have been holding it for a very long time without rest or relief. And Anansi, in his hunger for accumulation, had not quite worked through the question of where, once he had gathered everything, he was going to put it. He needed a container. He sat in the hollow of a dead tree one afternoon, a large and comfortable hollow that smelled of old wood and the faint, sweet scent of something that had once lived there and moved on. And he thought about containers. He thought about the clay pots the women of the village used for water, which were elegant and well-made, but also breakable and, more to the point, finite. He thought about the large gourds that served as storage vessels, which were natural and beautiful, but whose walls were too thin and whose opening was too small. He thought about woven baskets and carved wooden boxes and the large ceramic urns that stood in the homes of wealthy families, used for storing grain through the dry months. None of these were right. None of them were large enough or strong enough, and this was perhaps the most important thing, strange enough. The container for all the wisdom in the world needed to be something different from any ordinary vessel. It needed to be something that could hold an infinite amount, that would not crack or warp or leak or degrade, that was in some essential way as remarkable as what it was intended to contain. He was still thinking about this when the rain came. It came the way the big rains sometimes came in that country, without much warning and without any apology. A sudden, deep darkening of the sky, and then a percussion of drops on leaves that built quickly from a scattered tap, tap, tap to a continuous roar. And the smell of it was extraordinary. The smell of rain on dry ground, which is one of the most ancient and satisfying smells in the world. The smell of relief, the smell of renewal, the smell of the earth receiving what it has been waiting for. Anansi pressed himself further back into his hollow and watched the rain fall. He watched it pool in the hollows of large leaves and run in thin, clear rivers along branches and drip from one surface to another in a long chain of small falls. He watched lightning flicker in the distance, not the sharp and violent kind, but the slow, underwater kind that illuminated the whole sky from the inside out. He listened to the thunder that followed, a sound like the world clearing its throat. And then he saw it. In a clearing not far from where he sheltered, half hidden by the curtain of rain, sitting in the open space between the trees, as though it had been placed there by someone with a specific intention, was a pot. Not a small pot. Not a medium pot. Not even a very large pot by ordinary standards. It was an enormous pot, the largest pot Anansi had ever seen, larger than any pot had a reasonable right to be, round and deep, and settled into the earth as though the earth had grown up around it, rather than the pot having been placed on top of it. Its color was the color of the ground after rain, a dark, rich brown that seemed almost to glow from within, and its surface was neither perfectly smooth nor roughly textured, but something in between, as though it had been shaped by hands that had been thinking about something else while they worked, or perhaps by no hands at all. Anansi stared at it through the falling rain. The pot stared back at him in the way that only a pot can stare back, which is to say, it did not move or change its expression, because it had no expression to change, and yet there was something in its presence, in the particular quality of the silence it occupied, that felt communicative, that felt like an answer to a question. When the rain eased to a light mist, Anansi approached it. He walked around it 3 times, slowly, which was his habit when encountering something important, a kind of ritual of respectful examination, a way of honoring the thing he was looking at before presuming to touch it. He tapped its side with one leg. The sound it produced was not what he expected. It was a low, resonant tone, deep and hollow. But the hollowness did not feel empty. It felt like the hollowness inside a musical instrument, a space carefully designed to make the most of what was put into it, to amplify and enrich rather than simply to contain. He pressed his face close to the opening at the top and peered inside. The interior was dark, darker than it should have been, given the amount of light in the clearing. But it was not an uncomfortable darkness. It was the kind of darkness that invites rather than frightens, the kind that suggests depth rather than absence. And the smell of it, as he leaned in close and breathed it in, was the smell of rain and of old forests and of something else, something he could not name, something that felt ancient and serious and deeply, deeply settled, as though whatever was at the bottom of this pot had been there for a very long time and was entirely at peace with that arrangement. This, Anansi decided, was his pot. He touched its rim, and he felt something pass between them, the way something passes between two hands when they shake. A kind of recognition, a kind of agreement. He did not question this. He simply accepted it, the way you accept certain things that you cannot explain, because the explaining would take longer than simply allowing them to be true. He began to pour his gathered wisdom in. This was not a physical action in the way that pouring water is a physical action. It was something in between the physical and the metaphysical, the way memory itself is something in between, something that lives in the body but is not quite the body, something that lives in the mind but overflows the mind. Anansi stood at the rim of the enormous pot, and he let what he had gathered flow outward and downward, directing it the way you direct water with your hands, shaping its path, easing it along, making sure nothing was lost in transit. He started with the knowledge of the fisherman, the river knowledge, the fish knowledge, the knowledge of water and weather, and the way the two spoke to each other, the knowledge of nets and hooks, and the particular patience required to wait for something that might not come. It went into the pot like dark water, going into dark water, dissolving into what was already there, becoming part of something larger. He added the medicine woman's knowledge, everything he had absorbed in that small and fragrant hut, every plant and root and bark and leaf, every measurement and method, every warning and every exception to every rule. He added the elder's wisdom, the legal and moral and social knowledge of how communities hold themselves together through difficulty, how disputes are resolved without the resolution creating new disputes, how the interests of the individual and the interests of the whole are balanced against each other in a way that serves both. He layered in the weaver's knowledge, the language of cloth, the vocabulary of pattern and color and sequence. He added the blacksmith's understanding of metal and heat and transformation, the star reader's maps of the sky, the farmer's intimacy with soil. He poured in the ants' weather wisdom, as observed by the patient women who watched them, the forest knowledge of the children who moved through it with native confidence. He poured and poured and poured. The pot received everything without complaint, without comment, without any sign of strain. It did not overflow. It did not crack. It did not settle deeper into the earth under the increasing weight of what it was being asked to hold. It simply received, the way a great ocean receives rivers, not by making room for them, but by simply being large enough that their addition changes nothing about its essential nature. When Anansi had given the pot everything he had gathered, he stood back and looked at it. He had expected to feel lighter. He had expected the relief of having set down a heavy burden, the physical sensation of release. Instead, he felt something different, something more complicated. He felt the particular kind of satisfaction that is also, at its edges, a kind of anxiety. The satisfaction of having completed something enormous, combined with the sudden awareness of the enormous responsibility that completing it has created. He had everything now. He was the keeper. If anything happened to him, everything was lost. He needed to protect it. He needed to put it somewhere safe, somewhere unreachable, somewhere that no other creature, however determined or clever, could find or access it. He looked up. The forest around him was full of trees, and the trees were tall, and some of them were very tall, and one of them, visible from where he stood, as a dark column of bark rising above the surrounding canopy and disappearing into the low cloud that had settled after the rain, was taller than all the others by a margin that could not be measured in ordinary terms, because it simply went up and up and up until it was no longer visible. And you had to accept on faith that it ended somewhere, that even this tree was not infinite, though the evidence was not immediately available to the eye. This was the tree called the tree that holds the sky. Its trunk was so wide that Anansi could not see around it to where it ended on the other side. Its bark was smooth and dark and curved gently, like the side of something very much larger than a tree, like the side of something that was in fact a different category of object entirely, simply resembling a tree for reasons of its own. Its first branches began at a height that was genuinely difficult to estimate, so far above the ground that the birds who rested there were specks, barely distinguishable from the small clouds that sometimes snagged on the upper branches and hung there for hours before the wind took them again. Anansi looked at this tree for a long time. Then he tied the pot to his front. He used his strongest silk for this, the kind he used for the load-bearing threads of his largest webs, the bridges he built across rivers, the anchor lines that held his most ambitious constructions to whatever they were suspended from. He wrapped the silk around the pot and around himself in a series of careful loops, creating a harness that was, by the standards of spider engineering, quite elegant. The pot rested against his front, with its weight distributed as evenly as he could manage it, held in place by silk that would not break short of a force far greater than anything Anansi expected to encounter on the smooth bark of a very large tree. He positioned himself at the base of the trunk. He began to climb. Now, Anansi could climb. This was not in question. He had 8 legs, each of them equipped with structures at the tips that were designed precisely for the purpose of adhering to surfaces and then releasing from them in rapid alternation, allowing movement in any direction across almost any material. He had climbed things that had no right to be climbable. He had climbed the underside of water. He had climbed air, in a manner of speaking, using his silk as a means of controlled ascent and descent, a kind of internal elevator operated by his own body. Anansi, when it came to climbing, was one of the foremost practitioners in the known world. But Anansi, carrying an enormous pot full of all the wisdom in the world, was a different proposition. The pot shifted. When he leaned left to get a better grip on the bark, the pot swung right. When he reached up with his front legs to find his next hold, the pot slid slightly downward under its own weight, and the angle changed, and suddenly he was not quite pointing in the direction he needed to point. When he pushed upward with his back legs, the pot pushed back. A kind of argument between the upward intention and the downward reality of a very heavy round object that did not share his interest in ascending. He made it perhaps 3 body lengths up the trunk, which on any other day would have been the work of a blink, an exhalation, a single casual thought about something else. And then the pot swung particularly enthusiastically to the left, and his grip on the bark faltered, and he slid, scrambling, back down to the roots, caught at the last moment by his silk, which stretched and held and left him hanging about a leg's length above the ground, spinning slowly, the pot spinning with him, both of them regarding each other from very close range in a silence that had a complicated emotional texture. He rested. He looked up. The first branch was as impossibly far away as it had been when he started. He tried again. This time, he kept his movements smaller and slower, more deliberate, less enthusiastic. He made it perhaps 5 body lengths. He was developing a technique, compensating for the pot's weight with his own movements, leaning into its shifts rather than against them, trying to work with its rhythms rather than fighting them. He thought he was getting somewhere. He thought he was beginning to understand the system. And then a gust of wind came through the clearing. It caught the pot, which was rounded and smooth and offered no resistance to the wind, no edges for the wind to slide past, and the pot became, for a moment, a sail. A very heavy, very awkward sail, it pulled Anansi sideways with a force that had no business being applied to something that was trying to go upward. And for several long and undignified seconds, Anansi was horizontal on the trunk of the tree, all 8 legs spread wide, clinging with everything he had, his silk screaming with the tension, the pot swinging and pulling and insisting on going sideways, while Anansi insisted on staying where he was, and nobody was winning. He managed to right himself. He held very still on the bark of the tree, about 4 body lengths up from where he wanted to be, which was the ground, and not nearly as far from the ground as he wanted to be, which was the first branch. And he breathed. He thought. He was not accustomed to problems he could not solve. The particular uncomfortable sensation of being stuck, of trying the same approach twice and getting the same inadequate result twice, was not one he had much experience with. And it was, he was discovering, a significantly unpleasant sensation. He looked up at the distant branches. He looked down at the pot hanging against him. He thought about the problem from the beginning. He had wisdom. He had a container for the wisdom. He needed to put the container somewhere high and safe. The container was making getting somewhere high very difficult. There must be a solution to this. He was the cleverest creature in the world, and he now had access to all the wisdom that existed, and there absolutely must be a solution to this. He thought harder. He thought about it from 6 different angles. He thought about it in the manner of the elders, and then in the manner of the blacksmith, and then in the manner of the women who predicted rain, and then in a purely abstract manner, divorced from the specifics of his current situation, considering it as a general problem of physics and weight distribution, and the challenge of vertical movement when impeded by a pendular mass. He thought about it while clinging to a tree, which is perhaps not the ideal cognitive environment, but he did his best. And then he heard a voice. It was a small voice, a young voice, a voice that had not yet finished growing into the person it belonged to, slightly higher than it would be in a few years, with a roughness at its edges that suggested it was in the process of change. It was the voice of a child, which is not always the voice you want to hear when you are in a difficult situation. But sometimes, if you are very lucky, it is exactly the voice you need. The voice said, "Father." Anansi, whose concentration had been so complete that the rest of the world had effectively ceased to exist for him, startled so hard that he almost lost his grip a second time. His silk caught him again. He looked down. His son was standing at the base of the tree. His son's name was Ntikuma, and he was a small and serious boy with large, dark eyes that saw more than he usually let on, a habit he had inherited directly from his father, and which his father simultaneously approved of as evidence of good judgment, and found mildly unnerving in his own child. Ntikuma had been following his father for most of the morning. He had watched Anansi find the pot and make his calculations and tie the pot to his front. He had watched the first attempt and the second attempt and the sideways wind adventure. He had said nothing throughout all of this because he was waiting to understand the full situation before he committed to an opinion, which was, again, a habit he had inherited from his father and which would serve him extremely well throughout his life. Now he spoke. Ntikuma said, "Father, if you move the pot to your back instead of your front, it will hang behind you and not swing in front of your eyes, and you will be able to see where you are going, and the weight will be behind you instead of pulling you away from the tree, and you will be able to use all of your front legs for climbing, because they will not be occupied with holding the pot in place, and you will probably go straight up without any trouble at all." He said this in a perfectly conversational tone, the tone of someone describing something obvious, the tone you use when you explain to someone that the door opens by turning the handle, not by pushing, because you can see that they are pushing when they should be turning, and you are trying to be helpful without making them feel too foolish about it. Anansi looked at his son. His son looked up at his father. The space between them, the air and the distance and the morning light was very quiet, because what Ntikuma had just said was correct. It was completely and entirely and obviously correct. It was the solution. It was the simple, clear, evident solution that required no unusual intelligence to arrive at, that any creature with working eyes and a basic understanding of how weight and balance interact with the business of climbing things would have thought of in approximately 3 seconds of casual consideration. And Anansi, who had spent days and days and days collecting all the wisdom in the world, who had just filled an enormous magical pot to the brim with every piece of knowledge possessed by every grandmother, farmer, fisherman, blacksmith, weaver, midwife, star reader, medicine woman, elder, child, and careful observer in the entire known world, had not thought of it. He had not thought of it because he had been so focused on having wisdom that he had forgotten to use it. He had been so intent on possessing understanding that the actual act of understanding, the simple application of thought to immediate reality, had been crowded out by the enormous weight of everything he was trying to hold. This is a thing that happens. It happens to spiders, and it happens to people, and it happens, if we are honest, to everyone who has ever become so attached to the idea of knowing something that they stopped actually looking at what was in front of them. Anansi hung on the bark of the tree that holds the sky, 4 body lengths up from the ground, and he felt something that he had not felt in a very long time, because he was very good at not feeling it. He felt foolish, not in a devastating way, not in the kind of way that breaks something, but in the useful kind of way, the way that a soul contained embarrassment can illuminate something important about yourself that you needed to see, the way that being wrong, clearly and obviously wrong in a situation where the correct answer is right there, can reach through all the layers of cleverness and self-regard and arrive at something genuine underneath. And then Anansi laughed. He laughed, and it was not his usual laugh, the one he kept in reserve for moments when a trick had worked out and the other party had not yet realized what had happened. It was not the smooth, controlled sound of satisfied cleverness. It was a real laugh, a surprised laugh, a laugh that came from somewhere he had not expected it to come from. And it was loud enough to send 3 birds erupting from the lower branches of a nearby tree. And it made Ntakuma take one small, quick step backward before he understood what was happening. Anansi came back down. He came down carefully, managing the pot and the bark and the silk with a competence that his previous efforts had somewhat obscured. And when his 8 feet were back on the solid ground, he stood still for a moment, just breathing, feeling the earth under him, feeling the morning air on him, feeling the complicated mixture of things that was moving through him. He looked at the pot. He looked at it for a long time. He looked at it the way you look at something when you are trying to decide what it means, when the object in front of you has become symbolic of something larger than itself, when it has come to represent not just a thing, but a choice, or a question, or a version of yourself that you are in the process of deciding whether to keep or to let go of. And then he tilted it. He tilted the pot, and the wisdom of the world poured out. It poured out not like water exactly, though it moved like water, not like light exactly, though it shimmered like light, not like sound exactly, though there was something around the edges of the moment that was not quite silence, a sense of many voices speaking all at once in different registers and different languages and different emotional keys, some of them urgent, some of them gentle, some of them very old, and some of them very new, all of them real, all of them particular, all of them coming from somewhere specific and carrying with them the specific gravity of wherever they had been gathered. It rose in the air of the clearing, and it spread. It spread the way dawn spreads, the way warmth spreads when you move from a cold room into a warm one, the way a smell spreads when carried on a breeze. It went outward in every direction simultaneously, moving through the forest, over the hills, across the rivers, spreading itself along the paths of wind and water, settling into the ground, rising into the air, flowing into the dark spaces under roots and the bright spaces above canopies. It went to the villages and to the wide spaces between them. It found its way into the conversations already happening and the ones about to begin. It settled into the silences between people who were thinking, adding itself to what was already there without announcing its arrival, the way all the best gifts arrive, quietly, without making a fuss, simply increasing the richness of what already exists. And from that day forward, wisdom was not something that could be owned. It was not something that lived in a pa, or a box, or a single extraordinary mind. It lived in the space between people. It lived in the question asked by a child at exactly the right moment. It lived in the answer given by an elder who had been waiting their whole life for someone to ask exactly that question. It lived in the story told by a fire, in the demonstration given by patient hands to attentive young ones, in the mistake made and acknowledged and understood and passed along as a warning rather than hidden as a shame. It lived in the morning, in that particular quality of early light that makes everything look as though it is seeing itself clearly for the first time. It lived everywhere. And Anansi did not walk away from that clearing empty. He walked away lighter than he had been, considerably lighter, which was partly physical and partly something else entirely. He walked away with something new, something he had not gone looking for and had not expected to find, something that had been given to him by his small, serious son, without the son quite knowing what he was giving. He walked away knowing that he did not know everything. He walked away knowing that the wisdom he most needed at any given moment was not necessarily the wisdom he had collected and catalogued and stored away, that it might instead be somewhere outside of himself, in the eye of a child, in the word of a stranger, in the simple, unhurried observation of someone who had not been thinking about anything in particular except what was directly in front of them. he walked away, knowing that the space between not knowing and knowing is not empty. It is not a lack. It is an opening. It is the most important space there is, because nothing new can enter a mind that is completely full. And he had been, for a long time, attempting to be completely full. He also walked away with his son beside him, which was perhaps the most important thing of all. They walked together through the forest, on the path back toward the village, through light that came down through the canopy in long gold shafts full of slowly drifting particles, through sounds that were the sounds of a forest going about its normal and intricate business, the calling of birds, the movement of things in the undergrowth, the creak of large trees in a small wind. Neither of them spoke for a while, because they had the kind of relationship where silence was comfortable, where not every moment needed to be filled with words. Anansi reached out one of his 8 legs, and Ntikuma reached out one of his 2 arms, and they walked like that through the trees, connected, moving in rhythm with each other, father and son, the cleverest creature in the world, and the child who had seen what the cleverest creature in the world could not see. Both of them small inside the enormous, continuing, endlessly detailed life of the forest around them. That evening, back in the village, after the fire had been built, and the cooking had happened, and the food had been eaten, and the smaller children had been settled, and the satisfying hush of a well-fed community in the evening had descended over everything. Anansi climbed to his web, and he sat there for a while, looking down at the fire and the people around it, and his son sitting cross-legged with his chin in his hands. And he thought about what to do next. He spun a story, not a web, a story. He let the threads of it come from somewhere inside him, from wherever it is that stories come from, which is a place that is related to memory, but not identical to it. A place where what happened and what it meant live together in a kind of permanent conversation. And the story he began to spin was this story, the one you are hearing now, the story of the pot and the tree and the sun and the wisdom that went into the world. He told it simply, without tricks, without the particular brand of cleverness he usually applied to his stories, the misdirections and the traps and the punchlines that arrived from directions nobody had been watching. He told it plainly because the truth of it was plain, and he was finding, to his considerable surprise, that there was a satisfaction in plain truth that he had not previously given it enough credit for. He told Ntikuma the whole thing, the desire for wisdom, the gathering, the pot, the tree, the struggle, the failure twice to find the obvious solution, the son who saw what the father could not see, the tilting of the pot, the wisdom going back into the world. He told all of it. And Takuma listened with the particular quality of attention that children bring to things that matter to them, leaning slightly forward, eyes on his father, very still, the way small animals are still when they are paying their most serious attention to something. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions in the middle. He waited until the story was completely done, and then he sat with it for a moment, the way you might hold a new and beautiful object to examine it properly before deciding where to put it. Then he said, "So wisdom belongs to everyone now?" Anansi said, "Yes, because of you." Nantakuma thought about this for a while. He tilted his head to one side. He looked at the fire. He said, "Does that mean I am wise?" Anansi made a sound that was somewhere in the territory between a laugh and a sigh. The sound that contains both the recognition of something wonderful and the awareness of how complicated wonderful things tend to be. He said, "It means you were wise today. Whether you are wise tomorrow depends on what tomorrow asks of you, and whether you are paying enough attention to hear it." And Takuma considered this. It seemed to satisfy him in the way that honest answers to honest questions are satisfying even when they do not close the question entirely, but simply redirect it toward somewhere more interesting. Then he said, "Will you tell the story again? To other people?" Anansi said, "Yes, I think I will." And he did. He told it in the market, on a morning when the vendors were setting up, and the light was still low and golden, and the whole place had a quality of anticipation about it, the particular feeling of a day that has not yet committed to what it is going to be. He told it by the river in the late afternoon, when the fishermen were bringing in their nets, and the water was catching the last sun and throwing it back up in pieces. He told it at the edge of the forest to a group of children who had been playing a game involving a stick and a particular stone, and a set of rules that seemed to shift slightly every time the game was played, and who were willing to pause the game for a story, because Anansi's stories were known to be worth pausing a game for. He told it differently each time. This is the important thing about Anansi and stories. He did not tell them the same way twice. He was not performing from a script. He was having a conversation with the story, letting it change as it moved through different contexts, different audiences, different moments in the day. He took things out when they were not needed. He added things that occurred to him while he was telling it. He leaned into the parts that made people laugh when he was with people who needed to laugh. And he drew out the quiet parts when he was with people who needed to sit with something. The story remained itself throughout all of this, the way a river remains itself, even though the water in it is always different water. The shape of it was consistent. The heart of it was constant. But the expression of it was always alive, always responsive, always in relation with the moment in which it was being told. Each person who heard it carried it away with them in the particular version that their hearing had created, which was slightly different from the version of the person sitting next to them, because no two people hear the same story in exactly the same way. They carried it home, and some of them told it around their own fires that night. And their telling was different again, influenced by who they were and what had happened to them that day, and which parts had landed deepest in them, and which parts they were still working out. And the story moved. It moved the way the freed wisdom had moved, outward in all directions, following the paths of conversation and connection, crossing the distances between people. It arrived in villages Anansi had never visited, told by people who had heard it, from someone who had heard it, from someone who had been in the market on the morning Anansi told it there. It changed as it traveled, the way things change when they pass through many hands. But the changes were not corruptions. They were additions, annotations, each new teller contributing something from their own experience, the story growing richer as it grew more distributed, the way any living thing grows richer as it encounters more of the world. This is how stories work. This is how they have always worked, and why they have survived as long as they have, which is longer than most other things, longer than stone buildings, longer than empires, longer than almost everything except the land and the water and the sky. Stories survive because they are not made of stone. They are made of breath and memory and the impulse to share. They can be passed through any obstacle because they do not require a physical object to transport them. They require only a mouth and an ear, and the small but enormous willingness of one person to say to another, "Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something." That is what Anansi said. And that is what someone said to Anansi. And that is what is happening right now, between this story and you, in the quiet of wherever you are, in the growing softness of the night around you. Let me tell you something. Wisdom is not a pot. Wisdom is not something that can be carried in a pot. or stored in a box, or accumulated in a library until you have enough of it to feel safe. Wisdom is what happens when knowledge meets experience, and the meeting produces something that neither one contained alone. Wisdom is what happens in the gap, the moment between the question and the answer, when you are genuinely unsure which direction the answer will come from. Wisdom is what happens when a small child says one obvious and unhurried sentence to a father who has been struggling up a tree. And the father is still enough, humble enough, surprised enough by life to actually hear it. Wisdom is available to everyone. It always has been. It lives in the conversations you are willing to have and the ones you are willing to listen to. It lives in the things you see when you stop looking for what you expect to find. It lives in the moment of failure, if you are willing to stay with the failure long enough to learn its name. It lives in you right now, though you may not always have access to it, may sometimes be carrying your own pot full of everything you think you know, and finding that the weight of it is preventing you from doing the very thing you set out to do. When that happens, set the pot down for a moment. Look around. Listen for the small voice that has been following you all morning, that knows the thing you need to know, that is waiting patiently for a moment of stillness in which to tell it. And then, having heard it, tell someone else. That is the bargain. That is the whole arrangement. You receive and you pass on, and the thing you pass on is changed by having passed through you, is richer for it, is more specifically shaped to the needs of whoever receives it from you. And then they pass it on in turn, changed again, enriched again. And the chain continues. It continued from Anansi to his son, and from his son to whoever heard him tell the story to his friends, and from those friends to their families, and from those families to their children, and across rivers, and over hills, and through forests, and across seas, and through time, through more time than any of the original participants could have imagined, arriving eventually in languages that did not exist when the story began, in places that did not exist, speaking to conditions and situations and forms of confusion that would have been completely unrecognizable to anyone who sat around the original fire. And yet, here it is. Here you are. The night is deep now. You can feel it, the particular weight of late night, the way the darkness has settled into something solid and comfortable, the way sounds have become quieter and more widely spaced, the way your own breathing has slowed without you telling it to. Your body is already moving toward sleep, already leaning into it, the muscles releasing their arguments with gravity, the thoughts beginning to slow and simplify, and sometimes reverse direction, and sometimes just stop in the middle of somewhere interesting and stay there. This is good. This is exactly right. Before you go completely, before the last thread of wakefulness dissolves into dreaming, carry this with you. Right now, in this moment, while you are here listening, somewhere in the world, someone is telling this story. Not this exact version, their version. The version that has traveled from the original clearing in the forest, through all the mouths and all the memories and all the nights and all the fires and all the quiet bedtime voices, to wherever that person is tonight, sitting beside someone they love, speaking softly into the dark. The wisdom that Anansi poured out of his pot is in that telling. The wisdom that Ntikuma offered without knowing it was wisdom is in that telling. The wisdom of the fisherman and the medicine woman and the elders and the blacksmith and the weavers and the star readers and the children who knew the mushrooms is in that telling, distributed and alive, no longer in any pot, no longer belonging to anyone in particular, belonging to everyone in general, belonging to the air between one person and the next. It is in this telling too, and now it is in you. Sleep will take you in a moment, and when it does, it will take you somewhere that is made of wisdom in a different form, the particular knowing that lives in dreams, the understanding that comes when the usual guardians of logic and sense have gone off duty, and the deeper parts of you are free to say what they know. Pay attention to those places when you can. They are wiser than they look. But for now, just breathe. Let the story settle. Let it find its places in you. The places where it fits, where it responds to something already there, some question that has been waiting, some understanding that was almost complete and needed one more piece. Anansi is out there somewhere. He is very old now, old in the way that creatures become who were never particularly young to begin with, who entered the world already considerably further along than everyone else, and simply kept going. He sits on a web somewhere in a forest that still exists, though the world around it has changed enormously. And he watches the world with his many eyes, and he thinks in that curling, folding, particular way of his. And he plans. He is always planning. But the plans are different now. They are not about accumulation. They are not about possession. They are about the web itself, the connections between things, the silk that runs from one point to the next, and the next, and the next. Invisible most of the time, trembling slightly when something touches it, passing the information of that touch all the way along the line to wherever it needs to go. He is a better spider now than he was before the pot. He knows this. He would not go back. And his son, who is older now too, who has children of his own, and tells stories around his own fire, with the particular confidence of someone who learned from the very best, and then went ahead and became better. His son sometimes catches his father's eye across the fire, and they share a look that contains everything: the tree, the pot, the morning, the laugh, all of it in a single exchange of something between two creatures who love each other and have been through something together that neither of them will ever forget. That is also wisdom. Perhaps that is the deepest kind. Good night, now. The story is done, though of course stories are never entirely done. They just reach the place where they release you back into your own life, trusting you to carry what you need and leave what you don't, and pass on what you can. This one is yours. Do with it what seems right. The night is holding you. The dark is soft. The breathing of the world around you is slow and easy. And somewhere, on a thread finer than anything you could see, in a space between two ordinary things, a spider sits very still, watching everything, thinking about the next story, waiting for exactly the right moment to begin. Good night.